Other emergencies, Part 2. So let's look at some other things now that could possibly go wrong, and what to do about it. Some other fires that might happen if you have a wing fire, then what you want to do is lift that wing up and put yourself into a slip situation so that you can maintain directional control. And which wing do you put up? Well, the one that has the fire on it, because if you push that wing up, then the fire will be, of course, the flames will be shooting straight up. If you push the wing down that's on fire, then it goes closer to the gas tank, which is not a good idea. So you're going to want to make sure that wing is the one that's up and then get yourself into a slip. If you have a cabin fire, then do everything you can to put that out right away, whether it's extinguisher, clothes, or whatever, get it out. And then as long as it's out, open up the windows, the air vents, whatever you can to get some fresh air in there. If you can't get out that cabin fire, then go right into that emergency descent. So if you have a flat tire situation on the main gear, here's what you do. If you're on the ground, then you just have to try to maintain your controllability the best you can and bring the aircraft either back to the hangar, or you'll have to stop the engine and get a tow. If you're coming into land and you have a flat tire, then you're going to have some directional control problems. If you, let's say you have a flat tire on the right main gear, then you're going to have a lot of drag on that side. So you're going to want to, if anything, use a lot of left rudder and maybe gently apply some left brakes or whatever it takes to control the aircraft. Once again, if you're coming into land and you know the right tire has a problem before you come into land, you might want to land with as much lift off the tires as possible. So keep those flaps down and keep as slow as possible until touchdown. If you have a nose gear that's flat and you know what's happening or you experience it, such as a pop or the roughness when you come into land, use your feet to keep your directional control and keep your flaps on, and use your elevator full aft to keep that weight off the nose gear as long as you can. Alright, let's talk about some icing situations that might be considered an emergency. Carburetor ice. If you're in a carbureted airplane, then you could get carburetor ice. So, if you get carburetor ice, you pull carburetor heat so that the carburetor heat melts the ice. How do you know if you have carburetor ice? Well, you will see a slow decrease in RPMs possibly, or you could feel a rough engine beginning to happen, or a combination of both is a good indication that you have carburetor ice, especially if you fly through moist air that is somewhat cool, or reducing the engine power in moister air below the green arc. Induction icing. This is where we get icing due to impact at the carburetor air intake filter or the air take and filter for the fuel injected engine. For induction icing, the fuel injected engines pretty much already reroute the air itself as it can sense that, and it takes air from inside the cabin. Sometimes there'll be an alternate air switch inside the cabin. For a carburetor engine, if you have induction icing, you'll want to pull carburetor heat so that the engine can still get air via the air around the exhaust. You can get structural icing by flying through precipitation in the winter time or when the temperature is below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. If you have structural icing, then you are going to want to get out of that icing as soon as possible, unless your aircraft is specified that it can fly through icing situations and has de-icing ability. A tail stall can happen as a result of loss of air over the tail, such as in a slip with full flaps, or if you have icing over the tail, such as getting a tailplane stall, it's often called. Either such way, you need to get airflow over the tail. So you can do that by reducing to the previous flap level. If you have a tailplane stall due to icing, then you'll notice that that's going on before the stall by feeling some buffeting or shaking in the control yoke, and then suddenly the nose will begin to fall, almost like a stall, immediately. If that happens due to a tailplane stall, then you actually need to pull back on the yoke more and increase your airspeed a bit and reduce your flaps to the next or the lower flap setting that you just came from. You want to keep your speed up a bit just so that you can keep the aircraft from actually stalling in a slow speed indication. But nevertheless, bring that flap level back to the previous flap setting and land as soon as possible. If you have pitot-static icing and blockage, then if the pitot system is, let's say the pitot tube is iced over, then that's why we have pitot heat. And if it is blocked, let's say the ice is formed in front of the pitot tube, then your airspeed indicator doesn't get any ram air and it will go down to 0. Now if the front is blocked and the drain hole is blocked on a pitot tube, then your airspeed indicator will act just like an altimeter, so that when you climb the airspeed goes up and when you descend the airspeed will go down. If you have a static icing for the static port, then your altimeter will not read properly and your altimeter will stay frozen at the last altitude before it froze actually on the outside of the static port, and your vertical speed will show a 0. At this point, if you had a static icing, then you'd want to pull the alternate static source. If you have a vacuum system failure, then in the SPs, we're lucky enough to have 2 vacuum pumps. However, if it's a 1 vacuum pump system, and there's something wrong with the air filter or the vacuum pump fails, then you'll notice the suction gauge will go to 0, and your attitude and heading indicator will not work properly. Whether the heading indicator is spinning, or the attitude indicator shows a gradual turn to bank and wobbliness, then that's some ways that you'll notice you have a vacuum system. So if that's going on, check out the suction gauge. If you don't have an auxiliary vacuum pump or a dual pump, then you've lost your vacuum system and you have to just rely on other instruments. Okay, if you get into an inadvertent spin situation, then here's what I want you to remember. In any spin situation, that means you have a yaw and a stall. That's the only way a spin can happen. So if you notice that uncommanded roll seems to be getting worse and in this matter of seconds, the airplane seems to be falling at the same time, then you're in a spin. And as long as you, in the initial stages of the spin, break the yaw or the stall of the equation, then it will go away. So push forward on the stick and use opposite rudder to control the uncommanded roll. If you're actually in a spin and it's fully developed, then you need to use this technique, pair. That's power to idle, ailerons neutral, opposite rudder. Once the spinning stops, then elevator forward to break the stall, and then you can get yourself back to normal flight by full power and pulling up. Here are some physiological problems in aeromedical. If you have carbon monoxide poisoning and you don't have a carbon monoxide detector, but you notice that you feel very lightheaded, things seem to be going great, you're very euphoric, you maybe smell exhaust in the air, or you're feeling kind of dizzy, not so well, then you need to open up some windows immediately and turn off the cabin heat. It's better safe than sorry, so open up those windows and the air vents. Get some fresh air going in there and land as soon as possible. For hypoxia, it means you have a lack of oxygen to the brain. Then you could see blue lips. You could see some bluing on the base of the fingernails. Also, you're going to feel kind of a tingling sensation, lightness in the head. Things might feel great. You need to either open up the windows, or if you're at a high-pressure system, then you've lost your pressurized cabin. You need to make an emergency descent and get down as soon as possible where you can get some more oxygen to your brain. If you have supplemental oxygen, that would be the time to put it on. Disorientation. It's easy to get disorientated out there. So if you're disoriented and you're not too sure how to see what you're seeing outside, then rely on your instruments. Look down and rely on those, especially at night. And even in fog, hazy situations, it can be easy to get the outside to look different than it actually is. Inadvertent flight into IMC, don't look outside anymore. If you flew in the clouds by accident, then I'm not sure how that happened, but if you did, rely on your instruments, all right? Make a 180-degree level turn. Change altitudes if you have to for VFR conditions, and rely on your instruments, not your sensations. So ditching, that means you're going to be landing on the water. Now if you're on a lake then, and it's a smooth lake, try to land as close as possible to this shore. it's very important then that you can get out of the aircraft. And when you're coming into land on a lake, then you want to keep your nose gear off as long as you can. Come in as slow as you can. You fly that airplane to the last second. And then when you hit the water, it most likely will flip over. As long as your doors were ajar, you should have no problem getting out and then swimming right over to shore. The airplane could stay afloat for a bit, or it might not. It depends how much air is in the tank, in the cabin, and what's going on. Remember, if you're flying over a large body of water and you're unable to, within gliding distance, if your engine were to fail, come back to land, then you should always have life vests and materials available. So here's the deal. Let's say you're landing in the ocean. Okay, so wind and waves pose the greatest threats to pilots facing ditching in the ocean or on large lakes. Obviously, high winds and their associated high waves and swell systems spell the greatest danger. So if the surface winds are relatively light, let's say 50 knots or less, the prime rule is to touch down parallel, that is, in the direction of any swells. In stronger winds, it's recommended that you crab into the wind, of course, and try to land as parallel as possible to the main swells. Right before you hit, then you would kick the rudder to try to get yourself straight. This may mean flying a heading that's split between the wind direction and the alignment of any primary or secondary swells. Whatever you do, follow these prime directives. Do not land into the face of a swell, ever. The effect would be like that of flying into a wall. Then the wave will break over your airplane, covering it and submerging it. Do land on the crest or backside of a swell, kind of like piggybacking it. By landing on the crest of a wave, it won't break over the airplane, and the airplane will drift with the wave, allowing you more time to escape. By landing on the back of the side of the swell, the next wave is more likely to break before reaching your position. So if you just hit a bird on the actual fuselage of the airplane, then maintain control of the airplane and return as soon as possible. You don't know how much damage has been done. Usually what you'll hear is a little thump and you'll see a little bird go by, and then you got to go back and check out the airplane to make sure hopefully it's still flyable. If not, it's got to be fixed. But for the most part, the airplane will still be flyable. Now, if it goes through the propeller, hits the windshield or just hits the windshield and goes through the windshield, then you could have a greater problem. If you notice that bird is coming right for the windshield, I'd advise you to put your head down as soon as possible. Now, the plane's not just going to go anywhere. It's not going to start falling or any of that, but you're going to protect your body and yourself. After the crash has occurred, then you have your eyes protected while it's down. Once that has occurred, slowly bring your eyes up. Maybe put your hands in front of your eyes to keep any more shrapnel, bird parts going into your eyes, and then do your best to try to look out and land the airplane as soon as possible. As long as the airplane's still flying, you should not have a problem. If the engine is quit or is having a major malfunction, it's gotten really rough because part of the propeller broke off or it's been bent, then you got to shut that engine down, and then you'll be making best glide speed and probably looking outside the side window or whatever you can out of the front to see where you're trying to land. So the worst case scenario, the bird's coming right for the windshield, you know what, don't take the chance. Just go ahead, and if you can't maneuver out of the bird's way and it's still coming right for you and you know it's going to happen, just put your head straight down. Cover your eyes when you get back up and do your best to control the airplane. Good luck. All right, let's talk about some other emergencies regarding weather. A microburst. Well, a microburst is basically a downburst of air. And after it hits the ground, it spreads out in all directions, producing strong winds. And you can see how that might be relevant to a little aircraft or even a big aircraft trying to get through it. So as a big rain cloud, especially a thunderstorm, becomes mature, strong downdrafts occur, usually associated with precipitation in the form of rain, hail, or virga. The downdrafts can be very powerful, with vertical winds of 6,000 feet per minute. So when a strong downdraft, referred to as a downburst or microburst, hits the surface, the winds divert horizontally outwards. If you were to fly through a microburst, here's what you would experience. First, you'd be approaching a strong headwind and notice an increase in performance. Then you would be experiencing a vertical movement down, and then a tailwind, and you would lose that performance of air coming at you, and usually the aircraft would hit the ground. Here's a scenario. An aircraft on final approach encounters strong headwinds, followed swiftly by a strong downdraft and loss of altitude. The captain elects to carry out an mixed approach at that point, raising the undercarriage and pushing the throttle forward. However, the engines take time to spool up, and the aircraft continues to lose height and encounters strong tailwinds. So what do you do to get out of that situation? Well, the key is to avoid those areas, and here are some tips. Get a thorough weather briefing, including the possibility of convective activity. Do watch the temperature and dew point spread. Microburst activity is more common and more severe with large temperature dew point spreads. The falling rain has more opportunity to evaporate and cool the descending air. Do maintain visual conditions at any time with thunderstorms. Do perform an escape maneuver anytime you think you may be dealing with a microburst. And what is an escape maneuver? It's full throttle immediately, right away, and pitch to a very high climb attitude, or an attitude that will arrest your rate of descent. You may have to fly on the edge of a stall, but keep that full power in there and keep it moving upwards, because you will get eventually, as long as you keep flying straight, some downdrafts and then a tailwind. So the best you can do is try to escape it as soon as you notice that's going on. So, also, here's what you don't want to do. Don't fly under any thunderstorms at any time for any reason. Don't fly under the overhang of any thunderstorm. Don't fly into or near a rain shaft. Don't fly under virga. That's a built-in microburst. It's basically, it looks like rain falling from the sky. It looks like it's falling straight down and then it evaporates in the air. Don't depend on the fact that the flight that landed before you didn't report any problems. Remember, microbursts have a short lifespan, and it may not have been there when he passed by. Also, they're relatively small. His flight path may have been offset enough to miss it, so he may just be too scared to talk about it too. Thunderstorms. Pretty much, you don't want to fly near or especially under them or through them. If you did fly through a thunderstorm or got caught in one by accident, here's what you do. You pull the power back below maneuvering speed or near maneuvering speed. I'd probably pull it to a little bit lower, like 5 knots to 10 knots lower than maneuvering speed, and you maintain level attitude. Now, the inside of the storm is going to be pushing you up and down. Don't try to push back to get back to your altitude. Don't try to maintain your altitude. Just maintain level attitude, and you'll have to go with the updrafts and the downdrafts until you get out. Okay, fog. Well, fog can be dangerous, obviously, because of low visibility. Here are some conditions that are favorable for fog. Clear sky, little or no wind, warm, moist air, small temperature dew point spread, and over a flat land surface. If you fly into fog inadvertently, then you might want to treat it like flying into a cloud by making a 180 level turn and find an airport away from the fog so that you can be safe, and come back another time when it's cleared up. Alright, cold front versus a warm front. One thing you can always be sure of is a wind change, which is always associated with the passage of a frontal system. A warm front will usually have steady precipitation, in contrast to a cold front, which usually has showers and thunderstorms. And last but not least, these aren't really emergencies here, but they could lead to emergency-like situations, I suppose. In the winter, you have to be careful of over-priming because of the cold weather, and you also want to be sure in the wintertime to have your plane preheated. In summer operations, you have to be careful, obviously, of the heat and overstressing the aircraft out with the warmer temperatures and a hot start and a Cessna 172 SP. Also, in the wintertime, you can shock cool the engine if you run the engine idle for too long, or if you're running at cruise and then suddenly pull it back in a simulated emergency engine situation. It's not something you want to do, and you want to avoid that in winter operations, especially when it gets very cold.